The first stop of the 2025 Swimming World Cup is just about to start, where we're going to see our first of 3 different stops where some of the fastest swimmers in the world are all going to square off in the short course meters pool. Stop number 1 is running Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in Carmel, Indiana, and we have the psych sheet showing who exactly is swimming what. So let's break down this 79-page document. And I guess let's make some room here. There, that's better. So this is going to be a rare unscripted video here, a little more off the cuff as we just go through the psych sheet event by event. And the first event that we're looking at here, the women's 400 freestyle, actually comes with a pretty big bit of news for the entire stop and honestly the series overall. That's because our number 1 seed, Summer McIntosh, is not going to be swimming in Carmel. She announced on Instagram today actually that she is not feeling very well and her doctors have recommended that she skips this stop, which has a pretty big ripple effect on a number of different events, the first of which is of course the 400 freestyle where she set the world record last year. Now of course that does effectively give Lonnie Pallister the number 1 seed behind McIntosh, and she's been looking really good recently. During the last season's long course season, she was incredible at long course world championships and has been putting up some pretty impressive times, and that does set the table really nicely for her potential short course showing here. And I do think that she is a pretty solid favorite to win this event with McIntosh not swimming it, though Mary Sophie Harvey is not that far behind her on the psych sheet, so it's not like she can breathe too easily here. Now, as we move on to our next event here, the men's 400 freestyle, I am going to point out one thing that's going to hold true for all the rest of the psych sheets, and that's the fact that there are a mix of seed times in short course and also long course. So there are going to be some swimmers that are seeded a bit further down than they should be in pretty much all events. And if because of that I miss any notable swimmers, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. I might skim past someone as I'm looking at the wall of names here. But our co-top seeds are Carson Foster and Kieran Smith. And honestly, when I first saw that, I kind of forgot that they both tied for the silver medal at last year's short course world championships behind Australian Elijah Winnington, who is not entered here. And seated down in 4th place is Australian Sam Short with a long course time of 3:41.03, but he actually probably should be the number 1 seed because he did just swim a 3:36.12 at the Australian Short Course National Championships, and I think he is the favorite to win this event, not just because of that swim, but also because he is an absolute dog in the 400 freestyle, though Carson Foster and Kieran Smith have been known to throw down in the 500-yard freestyle, which is the equivalent of this. So hopefully this is a really good race. Speaking of really good 500 freestylers, we do also have Luke Hobson entered in this event. He is a really good 500 freestyler at the NCAA level and is more notable in his short course meters resume for now being the world record holder in the short course meters 200 freestyle. And of course, one that a lot of people are going to pay attention to is right below him, a couple spots down, Leon Marchand entered with his long course time from a pro swim series last season. And Marchand has been playing around a bit more with his freestyle, especially at in-season meets. And his 400 freestyle is one that interests a lot of people, seeing as he is the NCAA record holder in the 500 freestyle. I really hope he's able to pop something really fast at this meet and be in the race with those guys up at the top for the win in this event, because Marchand, when he is swimming a really fast 400 or 500 freestyle with those insane underwaters, being able to push those really far even at the end of the race is spectacular to watch. The women's 50 back is a completely loaded field. We have Regan Smith, Kaylee McEwen, and Gretchen Walsh, and those are 3 of the 4 fastest swimmers in the history of this event. In fact, almost in that order. The only one that's missing is in between Regan Smith and Kaylee McEwen. There should be a Maggie McNeil in there, and you'll notice that Gretchen Walsh is right there with them. Regan Smith is of course the world record holder, but Gretchen Walsh is only 1/100 slower than McEwen is. And if you only really pay attention to Walsh during her international swimming, this might be a bit of a surprise to you, but during her time in the NCAA, she was known to be able to blast some really fast backstroke times. In fact, before she switched over to being more of a 100 butterflyer, she was actually chose to swim the 100 backstroke during that day of NCAAs. Now, of course, women's backstroke swimming has been just insane on a worldwide level, and there are a lot of really fast swimmers. This 50 back is going to be a pretty fast final, I would bet. Molly O'Callaghan stands out to me as a surprisingly fast backstroker. Now, of course, some other notable fast swimmers. Catherine Burkhoff has always been really good in that 50 back. Kylie Moss is, of course, insanely fast in the backstrokes. Now, we're going to stay in the backstroke events, but we're going to switch from the shortest women's backstroke race over to the longest men's backstroke race, the 200 backstroke, where we see up top Hubert Koch with his seed time of 1:45.65, which of course is just 2/100ths away from Mitch Larkin's world record of 1:45.63. He went that during the short course world championships and just missed that world record. And honestly, I don't really know who's going to push him too much for the win during this series. I mean, he does have a lead of over 3 seconds on the psych sheets here, but one swimmer to pay attention to here is Leon Marchand, all the way down there with no seed time. It'll be interesting to see if he even swims this event, because he is entered in, I think, like 7 different events. 200 backstroke is one of the ones I would expect him to maybe scratch, but I would love to see if he can just test what he can do. And I don't want to skip over a little higher up. Shane Casas entered with a long course time here. He is going to be, I think, a very interesting swimmer to watch during this entire World Cup, because Casas is pretty good in short course, and maybe more importantly, he is a swimmer who can swim pretty fast basically all year round, which for more of an in-season meet like this is a really good skill to have. The women's 200 butterfly already had kind of a comically short entry list, and it's even shorter without our world record holder Summer McIntosh being missing, which does elevate Regan Smith up to the #1 seed. And Regan Smith, kind of like Shane Casas, is another swimmer that can swim pretty quick basically year round, and she has a pretty good lead on the psych sheets over her American teammate Alex Shackle. Honestly, looking at it, I don't really know who would be a major threat to unseat Regan Smith as the favorite. If anyone else touches the wall ahead of her, I think it would be a pretty big upset. The men's 100 butterfly is another one of the most loaded fields during this World Cup. Right up top, we have the world record holder Noé Ponty, and right below him, even though he has a pretty big gap, 47.71 to 49.17, Ilya Karun is probably not to be trifled with. He just ripped an insanely fast 100-yard butterfly time of 43.91, which, if you're not that in tune with NCAA swims, all you need to know is that that is very fast. And we see Hubert Koch appear again here, who is pretty good at throwing down some really fast 100 butterfly swims. We don't see him contest it too much at like the major international level, at like the world championships or anything like that, but in the NCAA, he's done that in the occasional dual meet, and I think in some pro swim series as well. I remember one time in 2024, we actually tied with Caleb Dressel for the win at a stop of the pro swim series right after NCAAs that year. And right below Hubert Koch, we have Josh Liendo, who is another insanely fast 100 butterflyer in both short course yards and long course meters, and we'll see what he can do in short course meters. Though one thing to note about Liendo in particular is we don't really know how fast he's going to be at this World Cup series, because he trains with the University of Florida, who does follow more of that old school training method where they are just absolutely beaten down, just dead tired during most of the regular season, and then have a monster taper. But something we could look out for as this series goes on is normally swimmers that train like that, if that is the kind of shape that Liendo is in right now, we don't know for certain, is that as meets go on, they tend to get a little bit faster, because just not being at home in that ridiculously intense training environment kind of gives them a little bit of a taper effect. There are some other notable names kind of sprinkled throughout here. We have Thomas Chacon, who can throw down down in a 100 butterfly and a 50 butterfly as he needs to. Trenton Julian, who is more well known for his 200 butterfly, but he swims his 200 butterfly by pacing the front half like a 100 butterfly, so he should be pretty quick here. And then even further down, we have some notable swimmers like Gabriel Jett, Michael Andrew, Matt Richards are all some pretty notable swimmers, some of them branching out a little bit more than we normally see them. Seems like everyone wants to swim the 100 butterfly, and they should, because it's a fun event. The women's 200 breaststroke is another event where we see the world record holder just seated at the top by a country mile, Kate Douglas, with over 4 seconds of a lead over her training partner, Alex Walsh. And even Alex Walsh has a bit of a lead over the 3rd seed. I think Kate Douglas, it's pretty fair to say that she is the big favorite to win this event at all 3 stops, just like she did last year. And in fact, she was breaking this world record at the World Cup last year, which was a big part of the reason why she was able to win the overall series. One of the major things that set her apart was how fast she was in this event in particular, and that she brought that world record down even lower during the World Championships. We can see she dropped her old time from 2:12.72 at the World Cup down to a 2:12.50, which now stands as her entry time. Again, in the men's 100 breaststroke, we do have the world record holder at the top of the psych sheets here, as Ilya Shimanovic is the #1 seed, though he is a bit further removed from his world record swim set back in 2021, but with an entry time of 55.60, he's not that far off of his own world record of 55.28. And a big notable entry is further down here, Adam Peaty, who has not actually swum at a major international meet since the Paris Olympics. The fact that he's racing at this World Cup is going to be pretty interesting. He is not quite as dominant in the short course pool as he is in the long course pool, but he has been very, very fast before and should hopefully be a pretty big factor in these races if he can go head to head with Shimanovic here. Another swimmer we really want to keep our eyes on here is Shin Ohashi, who was making some very big waves last season as he was dropping a ton of time in the 100 and 200 breaststrokes in the long course pool. Unfortunately for him, a lot of that happened after the Japanese World's Team Selection Trials, so he was not actually at the World Championships, but he ended the season as one of the top-ranked swimmers in the world in the 100 and 200 breaststroke, and it'll be interesting to see how those drops translate over to the short course pool. Normally, short course breaststroke can favor a lot more raw power and explosiveness, which you might not see as much of on a swimmer as young as he is, but with as much as he's dropped, he should be well below his entry time of 57.82. Going over to the women's 50 freestyle, we do of course have Gretchen Walsh as our #1 seed with her world record time of 22.83, a bit ahead of our #2 seed from Poland, Katarzyna Wasik, with a 23.23. And behind them, we do have a gaggle of Australian swimmers like Alexander Perkins, Olivia Wunsch, Molly O'Callaghan. O'Callaghan is going to be an interesting one because, again, we've not seen a huge amount of her freestyle ability in the short course meters pool, but she does have a bit of speed, even though she is a little more geared towards the 100 and 200 freestyles. The men's 50 freestyle sees Jack Alexi and Chris Giuliano at the top of the psych sheets. They were 3rd and 4th in this event during the last year's short course world championships, but our top 2 swimmers, Jordan Crooks with his world record time and Guy Carib, are not pictured here, so they are de facto the fastest 2 from last season. Dylan Carter is another swimmer that has a lot of speed, so is Josh Liendo. He's been very good in the 50 free at the NCAA level. Again, see what I was saying before about whether or not he'll be particularly fast given his normal training style. Honestly, the more I look here, the more I see swimmers that have a very solid chance to make it in that top A cut and make it back for the final. This looks like it's going to be an absolute dogfight in even just the prelims in order to make it back. In the women's 100 IM, we have our #1 seed with world record holder Gretchen Walsh with a stupid fast 55.11, and Kate Douglas is a little distantly behind her with a 56.49. That would be incredibly quick if it wasn't right next to Walsh's time there. One swimmer that we do keep seeing towards the top end of the psych sheet in a lot of different events is Belgium's Roos van Dardijk, who is someone that was was swimming really well during the summer's Swimming World Championships, and she was in a ton of different events, winning some surprise medals, and honestly was kind of a constant presence. It'll be really interesting to see if she's able to do that again during this World Cup. She kind of surprised me over the summer, and she might keep doing that. We also do have at the bottom here a lot of swimmers that are instead seeded with a 200 IM time if they don't have a 100 IM time. The most notable ones here are a trio of Americans right at the top: Alex Walsh, Bella Sims, and Phoebe Bacon, who have been very good in the 200 IM and should be able to continue that into the 100 IM during this World Cup stop. In the men's 100 IM, we have a return of the battle we saw so many times during last year's World Cup between Leon Marchand and Noé Ponty. This is the only time we're going to be seeing this matchup because this is the only World Cup stop that Marchand is going to be swimming at. He's seeded with a time of 49.92. Depending on what form he's in, he might be taking aim at Caleb Dressel's world record of 49.28. And Noé Ponty with a 50.33 has a pretty notable leg up over Thomas Chacon with a 51.15. Like I said, these two up top had a series of pretty epic battles over the course of the World Cup. Marchand got the better more often than not, but at the first stop, he was only 1/100th ahead of Noé Ponty, and then during the second stop, they actually tied. But then during the third stop, Marchand put it into another gear, and we saw a bit more separation than we did during those first two stops, and these two were actually number 1 and number 2 in the overall series rankings, and honestly, the thing that determined it was those 100 IM races. Yet another event where the absence of Summer McIntosh is going to be felt is the women's 400 IM, where she had a frankly stupid gap over the next fastest swimmer on the entry times, and McIntosh is so fast in the 400 IM that her long course world record would have also been the number 1 entry. But of course, she's not going to be swimming at this stop, so let's talk about the people that are. And we see some pretty close entry times here between Abby Wood and Mary Sophie Harvey, and honestly, there's some other pretty notable swimmers here like Elaine Walsh and Freya Colbert. I think this race is going to be a pretty interesting one to watch. I personally think that 400 meters is a really good distance for some really tactical racing. Then when you add in the fact that you're swimming an IM event, then it can be even more intense and fun to watch. So even though we're not going to have our world record holder and just the raw speed out of Summer McIntosh, this could be one of the most interesting races from more of a tactical racing perspective. We see Hubert Koch back at the top of the site sheets in the men's 50 backstroke with a 22.64, with Lorenzo Mora of Italy right behind him in a 22.89, as they are the only two swimmers under 23 seconds. Canada's Finlay Knox just missed that cutoff with a 23.03, and behind him we can see that things do get pretty bunched up pretty quickly. Dylan Carter, Shane Casas, Michael Andrew kind of round out some of our top seeds here, and they are also some pretty quick swimmers that will be pretty interesting to watch. Moving on to the women's 200 freestyle, we again see Mary Sophie Harvey towards the top of these psych sheets. She could be a pretty big force in the overall stop rankings here, and right behind her is Lonnie Pallister, who, like I said, in the women's 400 freestyle has been looking really good in the last like 6 to 8 months, and I'm hoping that we see some stupid fast times out of her. But someone who could be looking to spoil the party here is another Australian swimmer, Molly O'Callaghan, and like I kept saying before, she is someone that we have not seen a ton of short course meters racing from, but is an absolute beast in the long course pool, and her bread and butter event, if you ask me, is that 200 freestyle. I'm personally hoping we see some stupid fast swimming out of her in particular. I really like watching her swim, and I would love if she just blasted something absolutely insane. This meet continues to be incredibly stacked through the men's 200 IM, where we have world record holder Leon Marchand as the number 1 seed with his 148.88, as well as the reigning short course world champion Shane Casas with a 149.51. These are the two fastest swims in the history of this event, and these two are also the gold and silver medalists from the long course version of this event this past summer. And we also have our reigning world's bronze medalist in the long course pool in Hubert Koch, who is seeded with that long course time. We also have some other pretty notable swimmers like Finlay Knox, who's been a very consistent force in this 200 IM, as well as Carson Foster, kind of in the same boat as Finlay Knox. Noé Ponty is always able to blast some ridiculous underwaters and has some serious butterfly speed. He's probably going to be a big threat during that first 50. And Diaceto, well, he's a really good IM swimmer, as we all know. Something I just saw as I was scrolling down is, again, we do see Shin Ohashi entered, though he is a no time. It would be interesting to see. We saw some big breaststroke drops out of him, like I said, in the long course pool. Be interesting if we see him able to climb up the ranks a little bit more in the IM events and maybe make a final. That'd be pretty cool. Another one of many backstroke battles that we're going to be seeing between these two swimmers, Regan Smith and Kaylee McEwen, are of course the first and second seeds in the women's 100 backstroke. McEwen is the former world record holder in this event, but Regan Smith broke that world record first during the World Cup last year and then brought it even lower during the World Championships, where her entry time of 54.02 currently stands. These two are probably the pretty clear 1 and 2 favorites, but of course in these backstroke fields you can never get too comfortable counting out Kylie Maas, and honestly Catherine Burkhoff is, like I highlighted in the 50 backstroke, someone who has consistently been a pretty big threat to try and spoil this podium. The men's 50 breaststroke has a lot of the usual suspects that we saw in the 100 breaststroke, with Ilya Shamanovich sitting as the #1 seed, and with Adam Peaty lurking that we will expect to move up quite a bit, with Shin Ohashi right below him. And again, we'll see how his drops from the long course pool translate to the short course pool, though through the 3 breaststroke events, this is probably going to end up being his weakest. In the women's 50 butterfly, we of course have Gretchen Walsh as the #1 seed with her world record time of 23:94, and she is the overwhelming favorite. She has the 3 fastest times in the history of this event, and like I've said before, one of my all-time favorite swimming stats is that she actually has the 5 fastest times in this event if you count 2 of her opening 50 butterfly splits from her 100 butterfly world records from last year's short course world championships. Absolutely ridiculous speed out of Gretchen Walsh in these short course butterfly events. Behind Walsh, and honestly with a decent gap over the rest of the entry times, we do have Australia's Alexandra Perkins, and in #3 seed we see Van Otterzik again, which, as I said, she is a constant force in kind of this upper tier of a lot of different finals on the psych sheet, and I'm expecting her to translate that into the actual events. In the men's 100 freestyle, we have the reigning short course world champion and long course world silver medalist Jack Alexey as the #1 seed with a whopping 45.05. Right behind him is again Chris Giuliano with a 45.51. And I would also mention Thomas Chacon in 4th seed right here has been sneaky fast in this event before. He's always throwing down in the long course pool in the 100 freestyle on relays in particular, but he actually did win this event at the first stop last year over world record holder in the long course pool, Pension La. And of course, I do need to point out that this is another event that Leon Marchand is entered in, and probably one of the other ones I wouldn't be too surprised if he scratched out of it, though if he can make the final out of the mornings, I would be pretty impressed, and it would be cool to see him swim it. And honestly, this is another event where you can just keep going down and down and down and see some absolutely titanic threats to make this final, or honestly even win the whole thing. This is a very loaded field. In the women's 100 breaststroke, we have a quartet of 103 seed times led at the top by Estonia's Anneli Jefimova. I do think any of these top 4 swimmers here with those 103 seed times are pretty good picks to win this event, though I would give Yefimova there the slight edge. And down here with a 105.19 from the long course pool, Anna Eldent went that time on her way to winning the long course gold medal in this event, so I would watch out for her. We do know she has some serious short course experience because she was an NCAA swimmer. I will say, from all of these swimmers, the one thing I would love to please ask is someone break this world record, or at least the World Cup record, because whenever this graphic appears on screen showing the fact there's a world record and the world record was tied twice, and also that world record was the World Cup record and that World Cup record was tied once and is also the World Junior record, it looks ridiculous. Or maybe keep it, maybe tie it again, and maybe just add more lines, especially if one of them could be a under 18 swimmer. None of them are. Get an 18-year-old to tie this world record, just make it look even dumber. In the men's 100 butterfly, I mentioned that Ilya Karun is looking incredibly dangerous, and that holds true for the 200 butterfly. I'm going to use a yards time again, but he just went a 137.9. Again, if you don't know what that means, just know it is very fast, and he is also the reigning short course world champion from last year, with Alberto Rossetti not that far behind him, so hopefully we'll see a pretty electric race. We know Karun should be in pretty good form. It'll be interesting to see what kind of form Rossetti's in. Our third seed here, Trenton Julian, was a pretty big force to be reckoned with last year during the World Cup, where he won the first and second stops, but was denied the triple crown at the third stop by Chad Leclos, but he was definitely a big threat during that World Cup. In the men's 1500 freestyle, and I will say the way the distance events work at the World Cup is I believe that's going to be the men's 1500 for stop 1, then the 800 for stop 2, then the 1500 again for stop 3, and I believe the women are flip-flop doing 800, 1500, and 800. But in that, again, just like the 400 freestyle, I need to highlight Sam Short. He's seeded second with a 14.43 from his long course swim during last summer's World Championships. He actually just recently went a 14.23, I want to say, at that Australian short course nationals, which would put him the #1 seed by a country mile. I checked, it was a 14.25, so a little bit slower than what I said, but still the whole #1 seed thing. Also, interestingly, Carson Foster is entered as the #3 seed. This will be super interesting to see if he actually swims this or not, but I would be super curious to see what he actually does in it. Okay, speaking of Carson Foster, I'm pretty sure these events are on the same day, and this would be an insane double because they're back-to-back events, but in the men's 400 IM, he is the #1 seed. So if I'm right and those are actually back-to-back events on the same day, I'm gonna guess he's skipping one of the two, or he is an absolute monster. Behind Foster, we do again have some pretty big threats in this event. Alberto Rossetti again, Diaceto is the world record holder in this event, Max Litchfield is someone who's been able to throw down, and again, just like the women's 400 IM, this should be a highly tactical race, which will be really fun to watch. Now, one swimmer you probably noticed I didn't mention is Leon Marchand, because he's actually not entered in the 400 IM. The only IM events he's going to be swimming is the 100 and 200. Just like in the 50 butterfly, the women's 100 butterfly has a very clear #1 seed in Gretchen Walsh with an insane 52.71 over Alexander Perkins' 55.10 on the entry times. And Gretchen Walsh is so fast that just like Summer McIntosh in that 400 IM, you could enter her with her long course world record and she would still be the #1 seed. She is by far and away expected to run away with the win here unless something absolutely catastrophic happens or someone else just swims completely out of their mind. A couple of interesting no time entries here are Kylie Moss and Molly O'Callaghan, who are both obviously incredibly talented swimmers swimmers in other disciplines that we don't really see branch out to this event that is super fun, and I would definitely keep an eye out on them. You could probably have guessed this at the top when we're talking about the men's 100 butterfly, but in the 50 butterfly, it is another absolutely loaded field headlined by world record holder Noe Ponti. He first broke this world record at the World Cup before lowering it at World Championships. Behind him, we have Ilya Karun, who I keep mentioning has been looking really good, at least going by NCAA swims, and we do have Dylan Carter, who is a pretty good 50 swimmer, same with Michael Andrew. Josh Leando, we mentioned that 100 butterfly, he could get something done in the 50, and Thomas Chacon, who I always love, enters the 50s of stroke, in the 50 butterfly in particular, but has vocally said that he's not a huge fan of them. The women's 200 backstroke would have had an interesting third candidate with Summer McIntosh, but of course she's not going to be swimming here. Regan Smith with their world record time of 1:58.04 is the #1 seed, and lurking down here we have Kaylee McEwen, who is going to be expected to battle with Regan Smith for the win here. And I think that these two over the 3 backstroke distances over all 3 stops is going to make for some incredible back and forth, because you can honestly make a credible argument for either one being the favorite. Regan Smith owns the world record in all 3 distances and is typically considered to be a better short course swimmer than McEwen, but McEwen has a decently long history of beating Regan Smith in the head-to-head matchup in the long course pool. And I honestly think that since there's a good argument for either of them to be the favorite, I think they might end up splitting some of these battles rather than having one of them sweep one event over and over. Once again, the men's 100 backstroke sees Hubert Koch as the #1 seed with Shane Casas right behind, and they are very close in entry times here, so that could be very interesting. Kasper Sikowski has been making an appearance on a lot of different events. I believe this is his highest seed we've seen so far, and of course Thomas Chacon is the world record holder in the long course pool and should always be considered a factor in the 100 backstroke. The women's 50 breast, we again have a lot of the same candidates that we had in the 100 breast, with Anely Jefimova sitting as the #1 seed by a decently healthy margin, and I would predict her to maybe hold on to that. We see the men's breaststroke field diversify a little bit once we hit the 200 distance, with Japan's Yamoto Fukusawa sitting as the #1 seed, with Casper Corbeau not that far behind him, and of course Leon Marchand is also lurking there under the 203 barrier. We do see the return of Ilya Shimanovic in the 4th seed, and we have a lot of other very notable 200 breaststrokers like Ippei Watanabe, Kosuke Makito, and Shin Ohashi, as we have 4 Japanese swimmers that are currently poised to potentially make this final. I do think that this is Shin Ohashi's best chance to do some damage and make a serious charge towards the podium positions. The women's 100 free, we'd see Kate Douglas as the only swimmer under 51 seconds with a 50.73, with a pretty notable gap over the rest of the field with her entry time, though we do have some long course times mixed in here. And honestly, these top 4 swimmers look like they are probably the swimmers to watch for this podium. Katarzyna Wasik in the 2nd seed, Molly O'Callaghan with that 3rd seed. She is my pick to win it. And Marit Steenbergen is sitting in 4th, who is also a massive threat. And honestly, me saying massive threat right there is maybe underselling it a bit, because she did actually win the event over O'Callaghan in the long course pool this past summer. And once again, we do see Van Dardijk sitting poised to potentially make that final and maybe do some damage. And that might be the 5th different way I've said her name, because this is what happens when I don't script what I'm about to say and practice names I'm unfamiliar with. And actually I mess it up when I do that too, so maybe it's not even worth it. The men's 200 freestyle sees Luke Hobson sitting as the #1 seed with a 1:38.61, which is his world record from the short course world championships last winter. Maximilian Giuliani from Australia is a pretty solid threat sitting in 2nd, with Leon Marchand lurking right behind him to round out the swimmer seated under 141. This is another men's freestyle field where the more I look, the more I just see some pretty big names and some pretty big threats. I think Luke Hobson has a decent lock on first, but I will say that similar to Josh Leendo, Texas, where Hobson trains, does kind of follow that more beat you down and have a big taper, and Luke Hobson in particular is a swimmer that isn't super notable for swimming fast in season. It's not quite on a Townley Haas level, but he is somewhat similar, though we don't know exactly what his preparation looked like before this meet. So I think he's either going to be a pretty healthy first place finish, or he's going to be fighting to be in the field. Kate Douglas and Alex Walsh sit as the number 1 and 2 seeds in the 200 IM, and I think that they could do some pretty serious damage, with Abby Wood hanging not too far behind Walsh on the psych sheets, and Mary Sophie Harvey is a swimmer that I think is probably going to find her way onto that podium. Women's distance event for this stop, like I said, is the 800 freestyle, where we have Lonnie Pallister sitting as the number 1 seed. Now, I might sound completely crazy when I say this, but I think a world record is potentially on the table for Pallister here. She has a best time of 8:01.95, going up against Ledecky's world record of 7:57.42. But hear me out. This past summer during the World Championships in the long course pool, Pallister was an 8:05. Ledecky, when she went this time, was actually a bit slower, both if you go to 2022 or even jump ahead to 2023. She was a little bit closer, but not quite in 8:05 shape when she went this 7:57. I don't know if that is completely out of left field to say that, but I think Pallister was faster than Ledecky was in 2022, if that makes sense. Just because I kept pointing it out, I just want to say that Rouge van Dordrecht is entered in 8 different events during these 3 days. The 50 free, the 100 free, the 50 back, the 100 back, the 50 fly, the 100 fly, the 100 IM, and the 200 IM. That is ridiculous, and she is seeded decently well in all of those. And you know, I didn't point him out as much, but Finlay Knox is in a similar boat. He's actually entered in 9 different events. The 50 back, the 100 back, the 50 breast, the 100 breast, the 50 fly, the 100 fly, and the 100 IM, the 200 IM, and he has the 400 IM as well, bumping him up to 9. And again, he's positioned decently well in most, if not all of these. And if you're still with me, that was the entire psych sheets for the first stop of the 2025 Swimming World Cup in Carmel, Indiana. I think there are going to be a ton of super exciting races, and even just looking at the entries, this meet looks like it's going to be incredibly fast. Now, I know with me going through the entries like that, I probably missed a ton of swimmers, either ones that are going to make a final that you are really excited to see, or ones that could potentially miss it. When I review that many pages of entries, I'm gonna miss some people. So who is your favorite swimmer that I haven't talked about? Also, what's your potentially hot take for this stop? I already dropped mine of the world record in the women's 800 freestyle being on watch from Lonnie Pallister. What about you? Let me know down below.